What is going on, geeks? Noah Jai from the Geek Week here, and we are back with another review. Have you ever wondered what it'd be like if your everyday desk job took place on Mars? Or how about if you got laid off from said extraterrestrial desk job? And then what? Today we will be finding out just exactly what would happen in that situation as we take on the new series from HBO Max, Fired on Mars. Fired on Mars is an animated science fiction comedy created by Nate Sherman and Nick Vokey, based on their 2016 short film of the same name. Now, if you'll recall, Scavenger's Reign was also a 2016 short film adapted into a series by HBO Max. So, needless to say, I had my hopes up and my expectations up higher. And wow, Fired on Mars not only met, but far exceeded my expectations. The story follows a man named Jeff Cooper, a graphic designer for the company Marsley. Now, Marsley is a startup tech company that advocates for the advancement of technology and human progression on Mars. But as we'd later find, that couldn't be further from the truth. Oh, and I should probably mention that Marsley is the sole colony of living organisms on the entire planet. What does that mean? Well, for everyone included in that colony, there is nowhere else to go. Now, like I said before, Fired on Mars is a comedy, but if I'm being completely honest, calling it a dark comedy may be more appropriate. Now, make no mistake, there was plenty of moments that had me audibly laughing aloud, but there were probably even more moments where I was just deeply engaged in the plot and the story that was unfolding. But alright, enough pleasantries, let's dive in to Season 1 of Fired on Mars. Now, as I said before, and as the title of the show implies, when the story begins, Jeff Cooper is being laid off from his graphic design position at the company Marsley. And as I explained, with the Marsley colony being the only living organisms on the planet, Jeff really doesn't have anywhere else to go. To make matters worse, Jeff is in a long-distance relationship with a woman that works at Marsley named Hannah. Now, I know what you're thinking. How does that make matters worse? Well, because calling it a long-distance relationship is putting it mildly. I mean, Jeff is on Mars, while Hannah is still stationed on Earth. And though Jeff calls her non-stop, mostly because he has nothing else to do, it's pretty clear that Hannah has no intention whatsoever of joining Jeff on Mars, despite Jeff believing that she will. Oh, and that's not all. Let's just add in the fact that Hannah is being rizzed by one of her coworkers for good measure. So, yeah, Jeff's life's not so great at the moment. Unfortunately, Hannah's not the only person that Jeff is constantly bothering at this point, and the entire office at Marsley is fed up with his unemployed antics. After Jeff discovers a passion for labeling things with a label maker, he takes it a step too far when he starts labeling ridiculous items like phones and even a window. Yes, my man thought it was necessary to label a window. And that's not all. He's butt dialed by his girlfriend Hannah. With her not knowing he's listening to her conversation, Jeff overhears Hannah being rizzed by that coworker I mentioned previously. Hearing him convince her not to go to Mars, Jeff loses it, causing him to smash his phone through the glass of a space hatch, causing a significant pressure leak, sucking Jeff out to the surface. Now, the whole ordeal is absolutely hilarious to watch play out, because up until that point you get the feeling nothing ever seems to go right for Jeff, but at the same time you find yourself hoping eventually it will. In this moment, however, Jeff nearly dies, and he wakes up to find out his superiors Darren Young and Brandon Marshall actually put Jeff in a cryosleep tank after rescuing him. Not only that, but it's actually been 2 months since the accident occurred, and he's been in cryosleep for all that time. And if that isn't unsettling enough, Jeff learns that he was only let out of cryosleep due to a malfunction with the tank that actually almost killed him. But perhaps things aren't all bad, because upon waking up, Darren and Brandon offer Jeff a new job. Or rather, an internship in another department. But at least it's something, and Jeff accepts the offer. Yeah, I'm sure you're picking up what I'm putting down by now, so yes, things are obviously not as good as they seem. When Jeff arrives to start his internship where he believes he'll be assistant to Reagan Smith, the head of the Dreamspiration division at Marsley, unfortunately at this time he realizes he is actually the assistant to Reagan's assistant, as we are introduced to Jackson Oliver, Reagan's career-focused, heavily motivated assistant. Slowly but surely the two begin to bond, as Jeff learns more about how Jax runs things in the Dreamspiration department, including his method of lowering office stress levels by ventilating small amounts of nitrous throughout the office, inebriating his coworkers. Now that crucial practice of Jax's would be at the center of an altercation not long after, when Jax and Jeff decide to throw a surprise birthday party for Reagan. Jeff is left in charge of decorations, which honestly at this point we know is probably just a horrible idea, seeing as nothing ever seems to work out quite right for poor Jeff, and like clockwork, Jeff's birthday decorations don't quite turn out as planned, but instead of just accepting defeat, he decides to use Jax's stress-relieving method to sway the reactions of his coworkers upon seeing the mess of a birthday setup he created. Initially, his plan works flawlessly and everybody's completely high on the nitrous filling the room, and they all seem to be enjoying the aesthetic. The only problem is, Jeff forgot just how flammable gas is, as we see one of his coworkers go to light the birthday cake, instantly causing a giant explosion, seriously injuring several people. Now, after the unfortunate accident that nearly kills all the coworkers Jeff had only just met, he is yet again propositioned to be put in cryosleep. Although when Jax hears of the fate that awaits Jeff, he goes to the supervisors at Marsley and takes the blame for the accident instead, believing that he must have mistakenly left on the nitrous overnight. And just like that, Jeff is pardoned and replaces Jax as Reagan's assistant, while Jax is now set for a date with the cryo tank. Now, Jeff may mess most things up from time to time and can seemingly never get it right, but let's make one thing clear. One thing Jeff isn't is a bad person, and the fact that Jax is the one on the chopping block for something that he did doesn't sit well with him. Eventually, Jeff comes clean to his coworkers, telling them that it was him and only him responsible for the explosion. Jeff was hoping that his coworkers would be more on the forgiving side, but understandably, they are not. I mean, he did nearly blow them all to hell less than a week ago. Jeff is successful in getting Jackson off the hook, but only by taking his place in the cryo tank. As Jeff prepares for his fate, he calls his girlfriend Hannah to tell her what's happened and how he's going into the cryo sleep tank until further notice. Naturally, something else would go wrong, as while under cryo sleep, Jeff's tank begins to leak and he is released yet again, and it's just becoming comical at this point because they cannot get rid of this man. Jeff recognizes it was Jax who poked holes in his tank. Once out and given a second chance at life, Jeff rushes to tell Hannah the good news. Only this time, Hannah is actually honest with Jeff, and she tells him that she is not coming to Mars. Now single, we start to see Jeff focus on himself. And by that I mean binge eating and watching movies. While Jeff is in his funk, or as Jeff puts it, beast mode, he is visited by his coworker Martin and offered another job. Yes, the trend continues, as the job is not exactly what Jeff was looking for. The job is an assistant to a man named Sluggo. The job consists of some not so luxurious general labor, like exterminating rats, moving rock piles, but hey, at least it's a job. After each shift, both Sluggo and Jeff are tended to by a doctor named Crystal, who Jeff immediately takes a liking to. When one day, after a day of work, Crystal offers to give Jeff treatments outside of the workplace, and the two spend the night together. Crystal, though, makes it clear that her night with Jeff was a one-time thing. Jeff is still quite smitten by her. It's not until Jeff gets lost following a robot package handler that he stumbles upon a secret meeting, one of which where he is the topic of discussion, and one of which that Crystal is in attendance. Turns out the only reason the group had brought Jeff on board was to study the effects of radiation on the human body. Once Jeff's presence is detected by the group momentarily debates killing him. Right before the group is about to kill Jeff, however, he manages to escape and ends up right in the office of Darren. Jeff is questioned by Darren, who seems to know something illegal is going on behind the scenes at Marsley. Jeff insists he has no idea what Darren is talking about, despite the secret group contemplating his murder. And that is enough to earn the trust of this secret group that refers to themselves as the Buckies. And not long after, they formally ask Jeff to join them. But not before Darren offers Jeff a job. But this time, a job as a graphic designer. The Buckies, as they've dubbed themselves, are a secret rebellion effort within the Marsley Company. The group consists of like-minded individuals throughout the company, like scientists, engineers, hell, even a musician is in the ranks. And they all have one thing in common, and that is their disdain for Marsley. Everybody in this group can see past the company's facade of building an alternative future for humanity and sees them for all they truly care about: money. The group has been planning their departure from Marsley to start their own colony for quite some time, slowly retrieving survival goods and storing them away until it's time to make their move. The Buckies couldn't be a better fit for Jeff, who is not only around Crystal now on a daily basis, but for the first time on Mars, he's finally seemed to find a place he belongs. As a viewer, you really couldn't have been happier for Jeff in this moment. It was just great. That's kind of what I was saying in the beginning. There's funny moments sporadically throughout the show, but there were so many more moments that just made me kind of just happy, or sad, just really great storytelling. When the group learns of an upcoming mission for Marsley, they plan to take advantage of the opportunity by searching for ice while out on the mission. Finding a water source will be essential to their survival upon departing from Marsley. Whilst on said expedition led by Sheila, Bucky's woman in charge, the group manages to locate ice, but not before a giant sandstorm occurs, causing the group to become stranded and separated temporarily. Jeff ends up separated with Sheila as their oxygen slowly depletes. I wanted to include this because I've got a feeling it'll come up again, but while trapped in the sandstorm, Jeff and Sheila come across the corpses of 3 people seemingly attempting to do the same thing they were. Sheila also shares with Jeff she's confident they won't find any other life forms outside of themselves on Mars, but that's okay because they have each other. And just when things look their darkest, the storm gives way and the group is able to reconvene. Sadly, the ordeal had already taken its toll on Sheila as she stumbles down a dune to her death shortly after. I mean, what a moment. I'll say it again, this show had just flew so far past my expectations, it's hard to fathom. Not long after, the group has a reception as they mourn the loss of Sheila. They elect their new leader, Abbas, and look towards the future. Just as it looks like things are getting back to normal, we see that Jeff accepts the job offer that he was given by Darren. Now, though Jeff accepted the job offer at Marsley, he's still trying to do his best to remain loyal to the Buckies, and all the while ignoring Jax in the process. Jeff ends up meeting the executives at Marsley. As he drafts the designs for an upcoming project, he soon learns that the people are not like what the Buckies thought. They are worse. They are much, much worse. The ringleader is T, a former DJ and the son of the CEO. T is an absolute moron, and he serves as the creative director at Marsley. The new position and the obligation to the Buckies are taking a toll on Jeff. As we see in a Buckies meeting, he unwittingly agrees to push forward the Buckies' departure day to the Marsley Marsiversary celebration, celebrating their 30th year on the planet. Oh, and that's not all. Jeff is put in charge of feeding grasshoppers that are going to be essential in the process ahead. Honestly, they could not have thought this was going to be a good idea, putting Jeff in charge of something so crucial, but, of course, things go awry. Now, to make a long story short, Jeff was responsible for releasing a horde of locusts that were intended for the Buckies' departure. The bugs wreak havoc, destroying a good deal of property in the process, but what's more is now the supervisors at Marsley are aware of an uprising. When Darren finds a storeroom of the Buckies, he discovers a huge piles of potassium they assume will be used for terrorist attacks. Brandon tells Darren to cover up the bug incident and then get rid of the people responsible. Darren ends up enlisting the help of a man named Sully, an unhinged former employee of Marsley, with a nose for crime and a passion for justice. Oh, and did I mention he was unhinged? Another member of the Buckies, Hubert, goes back to their hideout to retrieve the last piece of evidence that can link the Buckies to the Locust incident. Whilst doing so, he runs directly into Sully, and before long the two are in a literal fight to the death. Hubert narrowly survives when he is able to push Sully down a garbage chute. Hubert safely makes it to Crystal's apartment, but none of the Buckies are safe, and they are now being hunted. Now, if that isn't complicated enough, not long after, Jeff gets a call from Hannah, of all people. With his new job title, he's slowly climbing the ranks at Marsley, at the expense of his friends, of course. But it's at this point that Hannah tells Jeff she is actually going to come to Mars after all. But Jeff isn't nearly as excited as he once was. Remember when I said the execs at Marsley weren't as bad as the Buckies thought? They were worse. Well, here's what I meant. In a private meeting with Jeff, T informs him of a hypothetical nuclear bomb and a hypothetical nuclear bomb shelter he'd be invited to if the nuclear accident were to occur. Yeah, it's not really a hypothetical. They're quite literally planning to nuke the planet and build luxury businesses for themselves to overindulge in. Jeff reluctantly agrees, then prepares for his upcoming presentation at Marsiversary. During all of this commotion, Brandon ends up firing Darren during the chaos of the Locust incident and not finding the people responsible. Although Sully was not as unlucky. Sully fell down a garbage chute. He didn't die, and now he knows for a fact that it was Hubert that he fought with earlier. Using a robot dog, Sully is able to organically track the source of the bottle he took from Hubert's apartment. And not long after, he ends up finding and arresting Hubert. And during all of that commotion, the Marsiversary celebration is taking place, and Jeff is about to be honored for his concept art he made for the project. Though when they call him to the stage, he's nowhere to be found. And at that moment, we find out that the presentation was actually hijacked by Jeff. And instead of pushing the propaganda he was supposed to, as messages about the truth about Marsley as a company take over the screen. Mars needs love, not Marsley, the screen reads, as we see Jeff riding off into the empty planet's surface. Now, with Hubert apprehended and Jeff effectively defecting from Marsley, we are left to wonder what's next for our unemployed extraterrestrial space friend. And that is where our story comes to a halt for now. Of course, as usual, this is just a brief rundown of the plot, and there's obviously so much more that didn't make it into the summary. So as always, I couldn't recommend enough that you take the time to go experience Fired on Mars for yourself. You will not be disappointed. But let's talk about it. Like previously mentioned, Fired on Mars far exceeded my expectations, not only from a character perspective, but from a thematic standpoint as well. I went into this show blind, knowing nothing but the title, and judging off that, I guess I was just expecting a much more goofy, jovial show, which, let me be clear, there's nothing wrong with, but that couldn't be further from what this show is. The premise is goofy, and sure, most of the cast is a bit quirky, but beneath the surface, we see a story about a man finding his place in the world, and more specifically, on Mars. Getting fired on Mars was likely the best thing that could have happened to Jeff. It led him to meeting Jax, a genuine friend, someone who truly cares about Jeff. We learn about Jackson's youth as an overweight child star, and how it caused him to run away from his past. We learn through Crystal going to Jeff's apartment that he wrote a letter to Jax. Jax reads it aloud, and it talks about the past being a prison if you let it. He also mentions a particular rock formation about 5 clicks away from the station. After his hijacking of the presentation at Marsiversary, that's where Jeff's headed. In the letter, he asked Jax to join him, saying he could use a friend for this next step in his journey. Now, Jeff's character had many shortcomings through Season 1, but one thing Jeff didn't lack was, well, character. Being a thoughtful, caring person was Jeff's best quality by far, and it drew people to him. It led him to tell the truth when Jax was blamed for the nitrous accident that he caused, risking his own life in the process. It led him to not tell Darren about the Buckies because he cared about Crystal and the others, and ultimately it's what caused him to hijack his own Marsley presentation with the message of love and peace, and to see past Marsley's materialistic ideals. Jeff's character throughout the show is without a doubt his best quality, and it shows in every episode. Aside from Jeff, the character writing for everyone throughout the show is excellent as well. The cave scene with Sheila and Jeff is a standout for me. When you hear Sheila talk about the others, you really get the sense she cares about them, not only as members of the Buckies, but as members of her family. T and the rest of the upper echelon at Marsley mirror corrupt government practices, and that idea is especially frightening when you see how dispensable they view other lives, as they literally plan genocide for the sake of capitalism and luxury. It's also so relatable that when Jeff starts associating with this upper echelon, and begins to be perceived as one of them, that is the exact time his ex-girlfriend seems to take interest in him again. Now, it's unfortunate, but this is how a lot of people actually are. Although Jeff was a person of great character, when his social status was lower, he wasn't worth the time of day. Once he began ignoring his friends and climbed the social ranks, he was more than enough to make Hannah want to make the trip to Mars. The world building throughout the show is quite interesting as well, because of course they are on Mars. And, as I said before, they are the only living organisms on the planet. Well, that we know of so far anyway. So the colony at Marsley is the setting throughout the entire story, as they only actually intentionally leave once on an expedition for ice. Life within the Marsley colony, however, feels quite developed. Like the people there know the way they want to see their colony run, and they know how to run it. And why not? They've been there for 30 years now, after all, and you really do get the feeling that they've got a rhythm at this point. I mean, that is, until Jeff shows up, of course, but you get the point. And although the colony is huge, you really do get that sense of cabin fever, especially in the beginning when Jeff is first fired and is losing his mind, overeating and binge-watching TV shows. When you're alone in that situation and there's literally nowhere else to go, either you abide by the program or you go into the sleep tank. Such is life at Marsley. I didn't speak as much about the relationship between Crystal and Jeff, but the two do like each other very much. They had a fight following Jeff's acceptance of Darren's job offer, but at the end of the finale it seemed as though Crystal was on her way to make up with Jeff after seeing how he sabotaged the ceremony. Now, it will certainly be interesting to see if she'll meet Hannah at some point in the future, with Hannah now scheduled to join Jeff on Mars. At any rate, I thought the relationship between Crystal and Jeff was handled beautifully, and I'm very interested to see where it goes. Oh, and while we're on the subject of character depth, I'm also very interested to learn more about one character in particular, and that character is Sluggo. No, but seriously, let me know. I can't be the only one, right? There's got to be some more to this character. It just feels like there's so much more to this character. Man, I'm looking forward to more of this show. The voice acting was fantastic throughout, but surprise, surprise, when does HBO not have exceptional voice acting in their animated series? Luke Wilson played our main man, Jeff, and you always just know it's one of the Wilson brothers when you hear them, don't you? Man, Old School will forever be a classic. Tim Heidecker played Darren Young, Sean Wing played Brandon O'Brien, Pete Davidson played Martin, Cedric Yarborough played Jackson Oliver, Amara Karan played Crystal, and Chase Bernstein played Hannah. The entire cast was fantastic. I just wanted to name a few. Rough Draft Studios was behind the animation for Fired on Mars, and I thought it was quite lovely. They went with an almost retro cartoon style, with an extremely simple but charming character design. Also, in a strange way, I feel like the simplicity of the artwork kind of acts like a counterbalance for some of the heavier subject matter within the show. For example, Marsley executives talking about, well, nuking Mars. Like, yeah. Now the only question left, really, is will there be more Fired on Mars? Now, at the time of this recording, Season 2 for Fired on Mars has not been confirmed. But hopefully, and I hope, we can get enough people to watch this show and respond positively to it so the show can get renewed for a Season 2. If and when that happens, you can bet I will have you covered here at the Geek Week channel. So again, I ask you, what would you do if you were offered a job position on Mars and then fired shortly after? Better question. Would you do what was right if the more rewarding thing was much, much easier? I'll tell you what you should do. Go watch Fired on Mars. Fired on Mars gets an 8.9 out of 10. As always, guys, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you feel so inclined, consider donating on the Patreon. It really helps out the channel. Guys, comment, let me know what you guys would like to see as far as reviews go or any type of video. I'm really trying to get this channel out there, man, so appreciate all the help, guys, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.